with all your knowledge of botanicals and sustainability, are we able to make a difference on an individual level? What do we need to do more as a collective? And just basically from your perspective, how you feel we are changing or making those changes.
So I work in a kitchen garden. So I manage a productive heritage kitchen garden that supplies produce to an on-site restaurant. So we're growing food on the site, we're growing it organically, growing the food in a way where we're respecting the soil and growing a lot of heirloom vegetables. So yeah, it's working really closely with the earth and, you know, producing food out of that. And so through working, that's my day job. And through doing that, I just became really passionate about the way we grow food. My background is I have a master's in botany, and I've always just been a huge plant lover. And so, yeah, I wanted to be hands-on with plants, and I started, you know, growing them, working with plants directly, and then that led into the growing food. And then, as I was saying, from my day job, I just became really passionate and interested in how we're treating the soil. So we're growing our food kind of en masse. We have an industrial, I suppose, agricultural system, which is profit driven, like all of our, or many of our systems at the moment. And on a huge scale, it's responsible for a lot of things which all kind of come in together as one part of a lot of different problems, or one heart of a lot of, that manifests as a lot of different problems. So when I say that, I mean things like how we're treating the soil. So when you're doing things on a large scale, there's often a lot of pesticide application, there's a lot of practices which over time are depleting the nutrients and the microbial communities in our topsoil. That in turn has a flow-on effect to how water interacts with soil. So whether the water will be absorbed, so let me go back a step, but if your soil is healthy and living and has good microbial communities, is full of nutrients that can feed those microbial communities and then in turn be converted into compounds that can feed the plants that you're growing in that soil, it will also start acting like a sponge where it can hold much more water than it would be able to if it didn't have that living, thriving kind of biome within the soil. And so when that happens, water that does come down onto the soil is actually captured and held and then becomes available both for the microbes that are living in the soil and for the plants which then can use it. Conversely though, if you have a depleted soil that's not thriving and healthy, often what happens is when there is rain coming down onto the soil, it kind of runs off, takes the top layer with it, and then can also cause subsidence and erosion. So you can see like the one set of actions, how you manage the soil, has an effect, a flow-on effect to so many different aspects of kind of the physical and biological functions that are happening, chemical functions that are happening. So yeah, there's a lot of research around, I don't think it's terribly widely known, but there's research around that's been acted on, in fact, by governments in the UK and elsewhere around how much topsoil we have left.
Wow.
And yeah, and the estimates are around 60 to 80 harvests worth of topsoil. I mean, they vary depending on method, and there's some different methods of calculating it, but you know, that should send a shiver through everyone, really, because everything that we've built depends on healthy soil that can produce food and water and fresh air. Like without that, we have nothing. Like we really have nothing. Everything depends on that. So I suppose I've just become really passionate about finding alternatives for people to be able to access food that's grown in a way that is not, you know, involved in large-scale land clearing, not involved in soil degradation, not involved in interference to the water cycle. That's one part of it. That's the kind of physical side of it. The other side of it is building, and something that I'm really passionate about, is building communities of people who are engaged in this sort of work, trying to make change and, you know, offer alternative systems that people can tap into. Because I really believe that the basis of all this, you know, kind of physical infrastructure, if you want to call that, the actual growing of the food and the managing of the soil, the thing that supports that is the social and the community infrastructure, you know, the bonds between people, the people who are, you know, invested in growing food in a certain way, or even as a person, you know, who's consuming the food, being able to go somewhere, look your farmer in the eye and say, okay, I know how this has been grown. I trust you. There's a relationship between us. And it kind of, it stops people from just being separate links in a chain. It joins the dots, if you like, where people are actually connected to each other, and there's, you know, there's accountabilities and responsibilities, not in a heavy sense, but just in the sense that it's a different sort of system. It's not a system that's held together by profit or by commercial interests. It's a system that's held together by people actually engaging with one another. So all of these things kind of coming together have kind of culminated in me and a group of other people in my local community setting up an organisation called Growing Farmers. And our aim is to establish capacity for regenerative farming to happen within local communities. We're starting in our own urban community, and we have started up some backyard farms. And so the backyard farms are basically, we put a call out for people who had big backyards that they weren't using, or they were, you know, weren't using part of. And we said, how would you like to have a farm on your backyard? I mean, we did a lot of vetting and all that sort of thing. And we set out the criteria under which, like the parameters under which it would happen. And we also put a call out for farmers. So people who were really interested in food growing regeneratively and in this way, like community building, soil building, all the sorts of things that I've spoken about. And we got some amazing applicants. It was really hard to narrow it down. Anyway, we've matched up our farmers and our backyard owners, and we've now got 2 backyard farms running in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And so the idea, I mean, it's a small scale at the moment, but the idea is just to show what's possible. Yeah, and you know, one of the things we've only been running, the farms have been operating since about October last year, so only about 3 months so far. Already, you know, we're just at the point of starting to get food produced there, which will be sold to the local community. But already everyone involved in the project is starting to report that they now have bonds, they have connections with the people in their community, whether it's, you know, the person whose land they're farming on, and obviously there's has to be a really strong relationship there, or whether it's the person who provides the, you know, newspaper that they need to add to their soil or to their compost, you know, like all these relationships and networks and kind of little organisms in a way, like organic communities are starting to build up.
I think that's really important. I think for the city, like we kind of get that a little bit down here just because we live in a small community, a small town. So yeah, I kind of have that experience where I get to meet the farmer and I get to know my food, and yeah, I kind of, yeah, the raw produce side is good for me. I forgot that not everybody else has that availability and that opportunity, and I think also just living in the city, you're also getting, you can get so isolated. So to be able to have that human connection is just a positive, really, on top of the fact that we're also getting a food solution system that might actually be able to counteract this as this commercial way of producing food that we find ourselves in. Because one of the things I was going to ask is, like, I'm trying to grow food in my own backyard. So is it better for us as a collective to go back to those old ways so there's less demand on that kind of production, on commercial production?
I think it's really good for everyone to grow some of their own food, if only because it kind of focuses your attention on, actually, it takes time, it takes resource, it takes water, you know, it takes good soil, and it takes that consistent attention. You've got to kind of manage your pests, you've got to, you know, it just, and then something, you realise that at the end of that process, you actually get something that's quite precious. And I think the fact that many of us, particularly living in the cities, are a little bit removed from, well, I could probably go higher than that and say we're quite removed from the system that gets the food to us and to our homes and our tables and our plates. It just reconnects you to that process and makes you see that actually there's all these things happening out there, and even though you may not see them, they all have to come together, as well as the transport and the handling and everything that goes to getting the food onto your plate or into your home. It also makes you realise that, food is connected to earth. And again, we keep forgetting that everything we eat has come from the earth. So, it's in our interests to make sure the earth, I suppose, maintains its wellness and its productive capacity. In a way, growing food can make you think about the politics and the economics of what goes into food production. So that's one side of it. But I think growing your own food is massively satisfying. You just, even if you only get a couple of tomatoes, you're just like, yes, look what I grew.
I have to say we got chickens, and it's been like 3 or 4 months, so we've been feeding them, looking after them, letting them in and out every day, and then we got an egg, and I was like, oh my gosh, all that work for an egg, it's so exciting.
Oh, it'll get better, I'm sure, Amanda.
Oh dear, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, but it makes you realise that there's a lot of people out there. Again, I'm all for showing what's possible. Not everyone has the time to be growing enough to feed themselves, completely or mostly. But we all have kind of the capacity to grow something, whether it's just a few herbs on a balcony even. It just reminds you that, food is living. Food is something that, is growing and needs to be treated with respect, not just as a resource or a commodity. It's actually, this is what sustains us. This is what our being depends upon. So, but the other side of it is, once you start gardening, and again, I'm coming back to this community thing, it's inevitable almost that you connect to a community. We've got a local group where I live, and it's just a Facebook community, but it's local people who are interested in gardening. And we share seeds, we share seedling. Gardeners always grow more than what they need. They sprout off too many seeds. They've got, loads to share. So it's that sharing of both the physical resources and the knowledge and when someone has a little bit of extra soil, they'll be saying, who wants, so it's just, you become embedded in a community, and the bonds within that community are greater than just we get along well. It's actually, we have something deeply in common and something that, we're engaged in for our mutual benefit. I don't know, to me, that's the basis of solid community, really. Yeah.
So with your community gardens, can these projects, I know you've just started it, so there's only a couple of examples thus far. I guess, what's your process for it? Are you going to give it a bit more time, or are you going to try and keep expanding it so that we can, I don't know, change the world?
Yeah, well, the idea is to change the world, right? But, slowly.
Yeah.
Look, I suppose our idea is to be able to inspire by showing what is possible. And also, we're not operating on the usual model of a community garden where people can come in and have their own plot and, kind of garden on common land. We're doing something a bit different because we want to show that it can be done as a way of a community potentially sustaining themselves and having, autonomy over their own food production. And obviously this is small steps towards a bigger goal. But I think once people can see what is possible, then they can become more empowered to start that up and attempt it in their own patch, their own area and their own community. We also, I suppose one of the things that we are doing is there's research about to come out. There's a lot of other research, but there's some research that's been particularly done in Australia by a local organisation here in Melbourne called Farmer Incubator around what are the barriers to people getting into farming. And although that research hasn't been published yet, my understanding is that the main barriers are access to land and access to capital. And this when we focus in on kind of urban and peri-urban area, you think about the pressures on land use and then to be able to get land if you wanted to enter the market as a farmer or as someone who wants to grow food, to be paying commercial rents and have, kind of a lead up time before you are able to, get anything to market and start turning some revenue. Like there's a lot of, I suppose, both financial and even just financial barriers, and then barriers around your own capacity, like whether you feel you have the networks, whether you feel confident enough, whether you're willing, what your appetite is for risk. All those sorts of things factor into whether you might or might not take that next leap. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to do as an organisation is to kind of bridge that gap. So to give people who have the passion and some of the skills and the knowledge to start farming, to give them an environment where they're supported, so we can, as an organisation, get them access to land that's underutilised, like the backyards, for instance. And we're looking at lots of other kind of or underutilised public land spaces where we could potentially start growing food on. And so we can negotiate arrangements that our farmers can then come onto that land and start using it for a purpose that benefits the whole community. So that's really where we're able to kind of add something that individuals might have not been able to accomplish on their own. But as I said, one of the things about, if you're in a community garden, anyone who's been in a community garden will know this, like it can, all these sorts of things, they are dependent on the passion and the energy and the attention they get from the people involved. Mm-hmm. So that can be kind of a downfall, but it can also be their great strength. And so although we're not operating community gardens as such, we are operating we're trying to establish food growing as an activity that's actually embedded in the community's day-to-day kind of things that go on, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it's an endeavour that is best done collectively. When you do it as a collective, when you do it as a group who are all putting something different into it, it becomes something that's more than just an individual or an individual enterprise. It becomes something that's bigger than that.
I think the first time I heard about community gardens was 20 years ago or something. So I remember going to a community gardens conference and I really kind of was amazed that there was all these different people from all around Australia. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a movement. This isn't just me thinking that things need to change. This is a whole collective. And then as I spoke more, or as the weekend continued, they were showing us examples of people in third world countries where they'd kind of grown food over all roofs, over all walls, over balconies, footpaths, the whole place was covered in food. I was just like, wow, that is just amazing. So I don't actually remember what the project was, but it was so inspiring. But then also we have a set of rules or something that govern us in the West that are probably a little bit stricter. And then we also have financial issues and challenges because we need to support ourselves, so we need to work, and then therefore there's not enough time to grow food. And so it was a really complex thing. So I do remember getting quite disappointed that we couldn't just magically click a wand and go, yes, it's just going to happen everywhere.
Yeah.
This is a great initiative because I hadn't thought of growing food in this capacity at all. Yeah, or even, the borrowing of land as well. Kind of feel that we're almost going back, a few hundred years. And I feel that's probably where we do need to go.
One thing that you touched on, which I think is really important, kind of underpins what we're trying to do, is thinking about the idea of the commons, and the commons that we've lost. And our culture is very big on boundaries, very big on private property. That's really one of the foundational ideas that a lot of our kind of economy and even our cultural ideas rest upon. And in a way, that's restrictive because this is my land. I own it. I get to say what to do with it. And although there are benefits to that, it means that also that kind of the capacity for activities like food growing we've become very segmented in how we deal with space, and also how we deal with a lot of other things. We kind of have quite a segmented, contained mentality. But in a way, you know, kind of negotiating to be able to use land for food growing, which might not have otherwise been used, is a small way to break down that. And I mean, as an individual, I can imagine, I mean, it's possible, but it's kind of not the done thing that people approach people and say, hey, could I just, you know, use a bit of your backyard, or use your nature strip, or use your tennis court, or whatever? Could I just grow a couple of carrots on it? Like, that's not really something that's done. But I feel like as an organisation, we have the legitimacy to be able to start talking about that with people. And we've been amazed at the uptake. Like, people are really keen, and there's a lot of willingness and generosity out there. It's a great untapped resource, I think. And yeah, even just in our small pilot, which we're a few months into, you know, and which we're a small new organisation, and so our reach is not enormous yet. But even with our small capacity, we have just come across so many people who are willing and able to share their space with us for this cause, because they believe in it. So, you know, I think this is a great untapped resource that we can start, you know, something really great to work with. And it does break down those boundaries, which we're so almost, you know, they're so deep in our consciousness that often we don't even realise how much we are, you know, fencing everything off.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, the idea of just having food growing through urban communities, for me, just, yeah, it's like a dream. Imagining when you were talking about your community gardens and they're just growing on every available space, it's like, why not? Let's do it. Why not? And, you know, there's case studies in Cuba, for instance, where they had to start growing food. So they've got a huge urban farming movement, and that's been really successful, and it's been held up as a case study around the world of what's possible.
Maybe it was Cuba.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you need to feed yourself, you find a way, don't you? I mean, even think about what's happened during the pandemic. Like, particularly thinking back to kind of, you know, early on in, say, March and April, when here in Australia and in Melbourne, we were going into a first lockdown. And there was so much uncertainty. We didn't know where it was going to go. Everyone was like, you know, knocking each other over to get toilet paper off the supermarket shelves. There was concern about supply chains, all that sort of stuff. You know, kind of when I think back to that, the other thing that I saw that was happening at the same time, and being in gardening groups and communities, obviously I had my kind of ear to what was, you know, I was seeing this happen, you know, I was seeing the discussions and just feeling the groundswell. But, you know, pandemic gardening, everyone has put in a veggie garden, haven't they? And there's been some research done around this by an organisation based here in Melbourne called Sustain. They did a survey to try to find out more about, you know, what's happening, what's motivating people, how has it changed their gardening practices. And, you know, people are clearly more interested in being able to, you know, take the power to grow something, even if it's not everything, you know, to grow something back into their own hands, to connect with the earth. It's, you know, I suppose a form of autonomy, isn't it? And I suppose the other side of things is, you know, once you start growing and collecting seeds, which is something I'm really passionate about, once you get a little bit of skill and knowledge around that, you actually realise that there's just this utter abundance. You know, like you think of one, I'm just thinking back to the garden, the kitchen garden that I manage, and late last summer, so around the start of the lockdowns, I had one lettuce plant that I let go to seed. I think it wasn't through any management. It was just that I didn't get to, you know, kind of clearing that row, and this plant went to seed. So all these baby lettuces self-seeded around it. And so I was like, okay, I picked them up and I transplanted them into rows, and I got about 16 crates worth of lettuce.
Wow.
From that one plant that just self-seeded. And so I collected seed from that plant as well, which I germinated off in the greenhouse and, treated as I would normally. It just shows you, lettuce is a very abundant seeder. It's in the daisy family. And, one plant, for instance, can produce up to 60,000 viable seeds. So that's more than you can ever use, and when you think about then all the offspring of that, if you manage it correctly, can be producing. It just shows you, this is what I mean, the abundance of gardeners. Gardeners know that there's all this abundance available and you've just got to tap into it and attend to it a little bit. So I suppose coming back to what I was saying before, just it's a way of taking control of your own well-being and your own, being able to look after yourself. When I can make a whole meal out of what I've grown in my backyard, and usually, actually, now that I think about it, it's usually supplemented by something that a friend's grown and that they've given to me as well. It's a great feeling, it's that feeling of, I grew this, there's no food miles in this, there's no carbon, there's no plastic being produced from the act of me eating this meal. And in fact, the soil's been enriched, the community's been enriched. This is what we call regenerative systems, really. Where everything feeds into producing the capacity for the next, for the future. Rather than depleting the capacity to produce and maintain and nourish ourselves for the future, regenerative food growing actually gives you the capacity to, increase the system's capacity to keep providing.
So this knowledge, like I remember I'd go visit my nan and my pop. They lived in the country and they had a big, veggie patch in their garden.
Yep.
And I also would visit my grandma and granddad and they lived in the city and they just seemed to have a veggie patch always in the backyard as well. So like that it seems like, parents' generation or our generation seem to have missed that. I'm just wondering if we've lost a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, I suspect we probably have. You're right in saying that there, in generations past, there was a big culture of growing your own food. And I suspect that was because food wasn't as readily available as it is now. And also, I suppose that probably financial and kind of socioeconomic reasons as well. We're very, on the whole, we're quite affluent and food availability has never been a problem in my lifetime. How lucky am I to be able to live in a country and in a time where I can say that. So look, I suspect, just similar to what's driving the pandemic gardening, is that like deep desire to take care of ourselves, to make sure that we can provide for ourselves. I live in northern suburbs, Melbourne, where there's like a very rich history of food growing, particularly, like amongst the Italian and Greek and like other ethnic communities who've lived here for a long time. So my part of the world is scattered with all these amazing gardens, with mature plum trees and fig trees and pomegranates and, and where the soil has been cared for over, kind of a couple of generations. So there is that culture in my community. And I feel like maybe I'm a Gen Xer, right? It might have skipped my generation. I can only speak to my own experience and my cultural background, but I didn't grow up. No one was encouraging me to become a gardener. I know that I was encouraged to go for those kind of higher order, or what we think of as higher order jobs. Like I ended up as a lawyer for, many, many years of my life, because that, I suppose, again, that's the kind of profession where, you are generally pretty well paid. You can support yourself well through that, through those sorts of professions. But in the end, just the kind of desire to get my hands in the dirt and, just to be hanging out with plants was too deep. But I suppose it's also, we've grown up, or I should say, have grown up in a generation where we have been able to outsource a lot of things. We've been able to outsource our food growing and, we've been able to outsource so many things and concentrate on that higher order money earning activity. And, I get that. That's how our system operates.
It's become like the demand to work has become the main focus, and then there isn't that time to put into the garden.
Yeah.
You know, my mum grew up sewing all her own clothes, and then she got to us and, you know, sewed our clothes for a bit, and then they were cheaper to buy and easier to buy than it was for her to buy the material and then make it. So the infrastructure changed, all the systems changed, and now it's our turn to change them all back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. The focus again, like your mum, sewing's a perfect example. Like my mum sewed too. And, you know, our grandmothers sewed because they had to. But, you know, we're now kind of in an economy where we make enough money that we can outsource those activities. But I suppose we've forgotten the joy that comes with them. You know, the fact that if you can find some way, even in some small way, to make a little bit of time to grow some of your own food, or, you know, to sew some of your own clothes, or whatever it might be, you know, there's a real kind of slowing down that comes with that, and coming back into, you know, the moment right now. You know, when you're out in the garden, you know, kind of digging up a radish, there's no capacity for your mind to be off. I suppose there is if you try hard enough, right? But, you know, it's more difficult for your mind to be off doing all the things that minds do. It actually just brings you right down and kind of centers you a little bit. You get the smells, you get the aesthetics, you know, the touch and the feel and the... It's funny, like one of the things that attracted me to gardening is that it is such an aesthetic activity. And although I feel like I've done enough study that I have some framework around what I'm doing and the plants that I'm interacting with to be able to look at things and know what's going on, a lot of it is that actually it's working by feel. And you can't do that when you're rushing. You know, it demands to be able to access that capacity. It's almost like doing a cryptic crossword, right? You've got to just kind of stop and let things kind of come to you in their own way, and then, you know, kind of use your mind intelligence and your deeper intelligence to guide you as to where to go and what to do next. And for me personally, that's been such a, I mean, it's been a lifesaver, really. It's kind of brought me back into my body, brought me back into feeling grounded, and, you know, given me something to be passionate about.
So it's kind of affected you on a personal level, affected you on a positive note. And through this, there's also a human connection that's also going on now. So I think that's great work, Alice. Love what you're doing.
I suppose that's what I say when, you know, you hear people talking about wicked problems all the time. I don't know if you've heard that language used, but people talk about wicked problems, the problems that we're trying really hard to solve, but we don't seem to be making any inroads into. And I feel like the wicked problems, like, for instance, environmental things like, you know, the soil degradation that's happening, or, you know, even climate change, all those sorts of things. I feel like the reason they are wicked problems is because our system and our culture and our economy actually incentivizes the basis of those problems. So until we kind of deconstruct a little bit, we're almost, it's hard to see how we can make any inroads into these sorts of things. But then once you do deconstruct, often the answer to a lot of different elements, like I was saying at the start, of the same problem, whether it's soil degradation, climate change, plastic use, lack of community, isolation, you know, all of those things can come together through one deeply profound changed solution at the centre. And that is what we're trying to do through Growing Farmers, is to, you know, bring the power to grow food back into people's and communities' own hands. And so in doing that, you know, once that kind of can potentially become more widespread, it can address a lot of those different things. It's almost like the reverse of a wicked problem. It becomes a problem that the solution is incentivized. There's feedback loops within the system that actually mean that all those problems just kind of have got their own way of resolving. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this very well, but I
know I got that one.
It's just, you know, kind of the soil issues, the water issues, the transport miles issues, the you know, carbon issues, the pesticide issues, the social issues, all of those can all be kind of wound up together in one activity, if that makes sense, or one endeavour. And so that's really why that's why we're doing what we do. I mean, look, we don't have rose-coloured glasses on. We know that we've got 2 farms at the moment in one city. You know, we've got, our idea is we've done a lot of process, like I said, that being able to kind of interpose ourselves between the farmers and the people who have access to the land, and to negotiate the arrangements to bring those together. You know, that's something that we've done a lot of work on, and we've had, you know, legal and other professional advice to support us in that. And, you know, if we can send all of the learnings that we've had on our journey, if we can send that out to the world, and then that enables others who want to follow this kind of model or, you know, do something similar in their communities, it then gives them a, you know, a bit of a blueprint, so we're not all having to reinvent the wheel. I mean, the amount of work we've put into this, not everyone's has the capacity or the time, you know, to be able to do that. And so if we can share that, and then that becomes a blueprint for others to be able to, you know, kind of replicate in their own way what we've done, then we can see that, you know, already the momentum that this project has had and the interest that we've had has been overwhelming, actually. And so we can see that there's a real desire and a real need. There's a real kind of, people are wanting this, communities are wanting this. So we wanted to provide an alternative system, you know, one where it's actually easy to just hook into your local food hub and order your veggie box, and you know your veggie box has come from a farmer who's grown it in your neighbour's backyard. And you know they're not using pesticides, you know they're not using plastics, you know that they're caring for the soil, you know. So to enable a choice to be made that aligns with your own values, that doesn't require you to have to work really hard to keep making that choice. Thank you. I love this project. I'm so glad. I'm just so glad that you're doing it. It's really important.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Alice.
See you.
Bye.